Hey everyone! Today I'm going to show you how to make a hoodie for a stuffed sea animal. Shark, whale, seal, anyone with this type of unique body shape. This is also going to include how to make the patterns, which are very different than my other ones. This video was a request by someone who wanted to make a hoodie for their shark stuffed animal, and I knew it would be a challenge, but they've been requesting this for I think almost a year, so I'm glad I could finally make it. I also happened to go to SeaWorld this week, so watch till the end for a little mini vlog with that. Now let's get started. Let me first introduce you to my client for today. This is Shamu. I think my cousin got her from SeaWorld and then eventually gave her to me. I didn't have any shark stuffed animals, but she had the closest body shape, so I'm going to be making this hoodie for her. You could easily just make this a shirt though by not including the hood. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is check how far down I want the hoodie to go. And I'm going to be using a rubber band to mark this exact location so all the measurements can be consistent. And now that I think about it, I probably should have added another one at the neck to know where the neckline would be. That would have been helpful. But speaking of the neckline, next I'm going to kind of look to where I want the neckline to be and then measure straight down from there to the rubber band. And then I'm adding another inch to that for seam allowance. Oh, and I forgot to mention, we're first making the main back pattern of the hoodie. This is going to be a big one, so I glued 2 pieces of paper together, and now right in the middle I'm going to mark that first measurement I took. I think I extended it to 8.5 inches, which I think was a little too much, but just do that in the middle of the paper. And next I'm going to measure around the back of her neck, so I'm going to have the tape measure start a little past this black line that's just her coloring, but this is where the front and back pieces of the hoodie are going to connect, so I think you'll be able to tell where that'll be for your stuffed animal. Checking all the way to the other side and extending it a little bit past that line, I got that is 14.5 inches. And I'm going to only draw half the pattern and then just fold it in half to cut it out. So cutting that measurement in half, I get 7.25 inches. So I would just try to get a curve similar to mine, not super steep, but I'm going to try to keep it 7.25 inches long. And don't worry, you can always adjust this later after trying it on. And at the end of the line, I'm just going to do like a horizontal line, which I can adjust later. And I don't know if I took this measurement later, but that's going to be kind of how wide the shoulder is, so I think I ended up going with maybe a little more than an inch. Okay, so I drew a vertical line down from that for some reason, and next I'm going to measure the hole for the arm. I first measured the curve around the arm and then drew it, but I think it's more helpful to just measure like the width of the arm. So when I do that, adding kind of a lot of seam allowance, I got 4 inches. And for some reason I didn't mark it, I guess because I already had that curve there, but you'll want to just mark it and then draw a curve. And I think you can just eyeball it and adjust it later if needed. Then I'm going to measure from right behind the arm down to the rubber band. And then I'm adding seam allowance to that to make it like 5.5. But you'll see as I try to draw this that the math just does not add up. It is way too short. So I eventually just drew a random line, kind of the shape of her body. By the end of this pattern, I remembered the measurement I was missing, so I'll talk about that when we get there. Oh, okay, actually I think there's only one more before then. So this second to last measurement is for the hole for her dorsal fin, so I really just need to measure how wide her fin is. But I also need to check how far away from like the top of the neckline it is. So I think I went with 1.5, and so I'm going to mark where that's going to start. And then for the width of the fin, I got 4 inches. I think I left a little bit too much seam allowance on this though. Okay, now I can fold this in half, preparing to cut this out, but this is when I remembered that last measurement I forgot to take, and that is the width of her body at the rubber band point, so at that lowest point. And I'm going to make sure to measure above the rubber band or at it, just don't go any lower than this. And starting a little bit past her side and going to the other side, that is 12 inches. And cutting that in half, that is 6 inches, so I'm going to mark at the very bottom of the page 6 inches. And then I can just redraw my line to fit that. Okay, now I can finally cut this out. Now I'm going to try this on to see if I need to make any adjustments. And this can be tricky because it's just paper, but you know, it's going to get beat up. Just try your best to get it as flat against their body as possible. And really pulling down the sides, I noticed this line could be steeper, and really just kind of extend more at the top here. And then for the shoulder piece, it was way too long, so I just folded this to around where I wanted it to end. But other than that, I think it's looking good, so I'm going to take this off and trace one of the sides on a new piece of paper, keeping that shoulder folded so I know exactly how it should look. And when I get to this area behind the arm, I'm going to extend that a little bit, and then I marked where that first pattern ended and then drew a line connecting them. Then I can just draw on the fin hole and cut this out. I tried it on one more time and thought it looked good, so now I'm going to move on to the front of the hoodie. For this pattern, I tried something a little different because, her underside is pretty flat, and that is to just trace her on the paper first. Okay, so I just put her on the paper and am tracing around her sides, and I can already tell something's wrong because the rubber band looks like exactly matched with the paper, so I should have scooted her up higher to add the seam allowance. And I'm also doing some little lines at her shoulders, and that's all you can do, so it was not super helpful. So to bring in some actual measurements for this, I'm going to measure just the front of her stomach at that rubber band, and adding a little extra for seam allowance, I got 7 inches. So I'm going to mark that on the bottom, trying to get it centered. And next I need to measure how tall this is going to be in the center, so I'm going to look to where I want the neckline to be. And then I'm going to go straight down to the rubber band and add a little extra past that, so that's 8.5 inches. I'm going to mark that in the middle of the page, and next I'm going to measure behind the arm down to the rubber band. And I got 5 inches for that. And I'm going to have this kind of be at an angle just to match the shape of her body, but I can adjust this later. And then I'm drawing a curve for the armhole up to that area where we traced her shoulder. And I think after double checking that measurement, it was a lot longer than my curve, so I kind of just extended the shoulder up. And I also compared it to the back piece to really just adjust the shape. And here's the shape that I went with. The width of the shoulder I kept the same as the back piece, and then I kind of just drew the neckline down to that marking. Now I can fold it in half and cut it out. Okay, trying this on, it's pretty obvious that it's a little bit too narrow, but I think the sides are looking pretty good. So instead of cutting a new piece out, I'm just going to add an extension right in the middle. So I'm just cutting the pattern in half, and I'm going to glue a rectangle of paper in between. And I should have measured this before I cut it in half, but looking at only half, I decided I needed a 1.5 inch strip in between. So now I can glue it together so it should eventually be the right size. Okay, trying it on one more time, it's looking pretty good, but there is one major problem when comparing it to the back piece. And that is they're going to have to connect on the side like this, but the back piece is way longer than the front piece. So I could either extend the front piece or shorten the back piece, and I decided to just shorten the back piece. But for some reason I was nervous about cutting this much off because I clearly made it that long for a reason. So I decided to leave it long in the middle and then get shorter on the sides so they would match up. My hoodie turned out pretty long though, so I think I could have done with just chopping it straight off. Okay, now everything should be good with these two, so we can finally move on to the sleeves. Okay, so these sleeve patterns are actually going to be pretty different from my usual ones because the way her arms are curved forward like this side right here is pretty long, and then the other side is much shorter. So usually the sleeve would look like this. It's what I've done in hundreds of videos, it feels like, not really hundreds. But today we're going to be doing the reverse of this, so it's going to dip down in the middle and be higher on the sides. So first measuring the outside of her arm, I got that was 4.5 inches, but I should have added an extra 1/2 inch of seam allowance because that side turned out a little bit short for me when I finished the hoodie. So don't be afraid to make that measurement longer than you think. But then I forgot I needed to do one measurement before this, and that is around the arm. So measuring loosely around her arm, I got this was 9.5 inches, but maybe you could forget that measurement because what you really care about is how it's going to fit with the other patterns. So I'm going to measure the curves of the front and back pieces. So measure one of each, add them together, and that's how long this pattern needs to be. And with that, I got it should be 10 inches. Now going back to that outer arm measurement, I can make that 4.5 inches tall. And the last measurement is the inner part of her arm. I got that to be 2 inches, including seam allowance, since it's already, right at the edge of her flipper. Now I'm going to mark that height right in the middle of the pattern, which I already marked. And I thought this was too short, so I just added, like a tiny bit extra. Now I'm going to connect these two markings with a curve. It took me a while to get the exact shape I wanted, but you really do want the top part, like that higher part, to be pretty flat, and then it kind of just dips down in the middle. Any shape remotely close to this should work though. So now I can fold this in half and cut it out. You know the drill, we're going to loosely try this on just to see if it makes sense, and so kind of connecting those ends and putting it around her arm, it looks pretty good. Looking back though, I probably should have made this outer part a little bit taller. Opening this up though, I did notice that it was looking a little pointy right in the middle there, so I just smoothed that out. It still looks a little weird, so I think off camera I cut off some more. Okay, the last pattern we need, if you want to make this a hoodie, is obviously the hood. So this was a little bit tricky to think about because if you went with a normal shaped hood, Shamu's entire face would be covered, which I don't think was the goal. So I'm just going to be doing a little mini hood that's going to cover about half her head because, it's not really defined where her head ends and her face begins. But for it to work, you really want to just have it start kind of at her eyes, because if it started at her neck or like her chest, her eyes would be covered. Okay, so the first measurement I'm going to take is starting kind of in the middle of her back and then going down to right behind her eyes or wherever you want the hood to start. And for me, that was 6 inches, but I'm going to increase that to 6.5 and mark that at the bottom of my page. Then I'm going to go back to that same exact spot right above her fin and measure how far I want the hood to extend from there. So I think I eventually went with like 5.5 inches, but my hood did end up a little bit short, so I would make this a little longer. I tried to measure out that curve and then just decided to first sketch the shape of the hood I wanted. So I'm looking at the side of her head and trying to get that shape, and then I'll check the measurement afterward. After marking that on the curve, the last measurement I need is going to be basically that fourth side to the triangle. So that's how it's going to go around her face. And I measured that to be about 5.5 inches, but as you'll see, none of this really mattered because the math does not add up. This distance is way too short. So I basically have to redraw this so all the measurements work together. And so I'm just measuring as I go, trying to get it all to fit. And this is the shape I ended up with. Basically like kind of a rounded triangle. It kind of does look like a shark fin, which is funny. But I'm going to put this on her head to see how it looks. And the main problem is there's kind of a gap right in the middle of her head where this should extend more. So I'm going to keep that in mind when I trace this and just extend this one side. And after cutting it out and retrying it on, this looks a lot better. Her head is fully covered now, but where this connects to the main base of the hoodie is going to be kind of a slightly curved neckline, so I think I need to cut off this bottom part right here. And after that, I think it's good to go. This is the pattern I did end up using for the hood, but I was fully prepared to have to redo it if I tried it on and it just did not fit. I also labeled what 2 of the sides were so I could remember what orientation it's supposed to be in because 2 of the sides look very similar. Okay, that is all our patterns finally done. I know we're already 13 minutes into this video, but the original footage for this started at 40 minutes because I was talking in real time, but I went with the voiceover to keep things more concise, so hopefully I didn't go too fast. Okay, let's get started actually putting this hoodie together. Of course, the first thing to do is cut out all the pieces, so I really just need 1 of the front piece, 1 of the back piece, 2 of the sleeves, and 2 of the hood pieces. But with the hood pieces, you'll want to make sure they're mirror images of each other, so I like to just fold the fabric in half, pin the pattern on top, and then cut it out. I meant to use actual sweatshirt fabric for this because it's like a special kind of fleece where the outside is kind of like a t-shirt material and the inside is fleece, but they didn't have it in stores. So I used this whale print flannel that I don't know why I have it, but I think I've just had it forever. So I figured it at least fit the theme. But this hoodie is going to be more of like a pajama style, it won't be super thick. So definitely feel free to use whatever fabric you want. It should still have that hoodie look. Okay, now everything's cut out and I'm going to just focus on the back piece first. I'm going to turn it over and fold up that very bottom edge twice to get a really clean edge. You could fold it over only once if you want though. I'm going to pin that down as I go and do that across the entire thing. Before I sew this down, I'm going to do the same thing to the neckline, but right in the middle is where the hood is going to be attached, so I'm only going to do it on kind of the edges of the shoulder, so not in the middle. And for the necklines, I usually just fold over the fabric once because folding it twice can sometimes be tricky around curves, but since this is so wide, it probably would have been easy. Okay, now I'm going to head over to my sewing machine and do a straight stitch, basically along where I've pinned. Okay, after that, I'm going to repeat the exact same thing to the front of the hoodie, except I'm going to hem the entire neckline, not just the edges. So after hemming those top and bottom edges, I'm going to sew these two pieces together right at that small shoulder edge. So I'm flipping them good side to good side and pinning together those edges. And then I'm going to do a straight stitch right across there. After doing that, I'm going to try this on real quick because if it's a little too loose, I can always sew it to be tighter around the shoulders. But it was looking perfect for me, so I can move on to the next step, which is cutting the hole for her dorsal fin, which I forgot to mention when cutting out the patterns not to do that yet, because this way you can get it more accurate. So I basically just made a mark where her fin started, and then I centered that on the back piece and then drew a line the length of her fin. Then I just cut along that line. Now I do still need to fold over these edges, but a mistake I made was cutting like a little horizontal line at the top and bottom of this cut, which I thought would make it smoother to fold over, but I would not recommend doing that because I cut it way too long and there were still raw edges from those cuts showing, so I eventually had to do like a buttonhole stitch to seal those in. But after folding those edges in, so from the outside it'll be nice and clean, I'm going to do a straight stitch right along there, and then I went back and did some buttonhole stitches around those other edges. Next, I'm going to set this aside to work on the sleeves, and the only thing to do is hem that bottom straight edge. So again, I'm going to fold this over twice, but only a tiny bit, and pin that in place. Then I can sew it down with a straight stitch and do the same thing to the other one. Now these are ready to sew onto the main body of the hoodie, so I'm going to line up the curves of the armholes and the sleeves good side to good side. And with my usual sleeve patterns, this I'll always say like is kind of awkward to do because they just don't match up. But with these, they match up perfectly, so it's pretty easy to match up the edges and pin them together. Now I'm going to use a straight stitch to sew along where I've pinned and repeat the same thing for the other sleeve. Okay, after both sleeves are done, I can finally work on the hood. I'm first double checking the pieces with the patterns so I know what side is what. But for now it doesn't matter because I really just need to sew the short sides together because that's where they're going to connect at the back of the head. So I'm going to flip them good side to good side and sew together right along this shorter side. I also did a little zigzag stitch on the edge to kind of hold in those frayed edges, since when the hood is down you will see that, but that's optional. Now I need to actually check with the pattern to know which side is going to be connected to the hood because the other side is what I need to hem. So after just picking one because they seem exactly the same, I'm going to fold over and pin that edge and then do a straight stitch along there. Okay, now I can connect this to the rest of the hoodie, so I'm going to line up the raw edge of the hood with the raw edge of the neckline, good side to good side, and pin them together. And then of course, I'm going to sew them together. Okay, here is how it's looking, and luckily we only have one last step, and that's to sew the sides together. So I'm going to fold this in half inside out and start pinning together the under part of the sleeves and the sides of the hoodie. This ended up being pretty straight, so I just sewed straight down here, and then I'm going to repeat the same thing for the other side. And with that, this hoodie is finally done. It's getting pretty late into the day as I'm filming this, so the lighting might be a little bit different. Oh wait, I actually did one more thing, which is why I'm trying this on inside out, and that was sew in the sides a little bit to be a little more fitted. So I'm just pinning together that extra fabric, and then I took it off and sewed along those pins. And so now it's a little bit more tapered to her body and I can trim off the extra. Okay, now I can finally turn this inside out and try it on, and here is how it looks. I'll be honest, I'm not sure if it is screaming hoodie because the hood is a little bit short and the fabric looks pretty thin, so it kind of just looks like fabric fitted around a whale. But you know, I think that's probably the definition of clothing, so it's a success. I really hope you all enjoyed this video, especially whoever requested this. I hope you make this for your shark because I know you've been waiting for a long time. Please give this video a like, comment any video requests you have, and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you next time. Bye! Hoodie. So if you take off the hood, it would just be a shirt. But, oh wait, I didn't think about the Velcro. Dang it. And I'm going to only draw half the pattern and then just fold it in half to cut it out. So cutting that measurement in half, that is 7 and a quarter inches.